Hello, everyone. This is Parrish Alford with the Daily Journal. I'm joined by Logan Lowery, our Mississippi State beat writer, and this is Double Coverage, a production of the Daily Journal. We're glad you've chosen to click in with us today. We're going to talk Mississippi State and Ole Miss for the next half hour or so. Logan, how are you, man?
Doing good. Still juggling those couple of sports that we got going on right now, and it was interesting. Busy day on Wednesday with National Signing Day for men's and women's basketball and baseball, and then you kind of shift gears. You got the opening of college basketball on Friday, and then a big game with Alabama, top 25 matchup here in Starkville between Mississippi State and Alabama on Saturday. So a busy few days ahead.
Oh, yes, the big game. Yeah, lots going on. Who does State open up with basketball Friday?
The men play first. They open at 5:30 against Alabama State, and then they're going to have a banner hanging ceremony for the women for their accomplishments from last year, and then they open up with Virginia at 8 o'clock that night. So kind of a doubleheader. It's kind of like it reminds me a lot of high school. When you go and you cover the girls' game, then you cover the boys' game in high school. It's going to be kind of flip flop. You're going to cover the men's game first, and then cover the women's game as a finale. But be a busy Friday night.
Well, that'll be a nice night for the Mississippi State ladies there. Ole Miss opens basketball as well with Louisiana Lafayette. That's also the football opponent, but it will be the Cajuns there for basketball as well on Friday night at around 7, because the women will open at 5 o'clock with Northwestern State, also from Louisiana there in Natchitoches. Of course, the Louisiana Lafayette men are coached by Bob Marlin, the former the Tupelo resident, native Tupelo guy, and former Mississippi State. I don't know, Logan, did he play there? Or I think he just coached there a little bit. Do you know your Bob Marlin history?
That is over my head. That is pre Logan Lowery era covering Mississippi State. I'm not familiar.
Yeah, there's a Bob Marlin and Mississippi State past there as well. But he's a good guy. I've spoken with him many times, and he'll have the Cajuns there tomorrow night to face Ole Miss as college basketball season gets underway. Folks, before we move too much deeper into the podcast, I want to remind you of some other productions to be on the lookout for from the Daily Journal. Be sure to check out The Memo. Our news podcast comes to you every Wednesday and Friday with Chris Kiefer and Derek Russell. And look for Prep Rally for all your high school sports needs every Wednesday with Brad Locke and Dalton Middleton. That's Prep Rally. And, of course, Logan and I are here with you every week for Double Coverage. Logan, I know that the opening of college basketball on a Friday night, it excites John Pitts to no end, number one. Okay, and as important as it is, let's talk about this Mississippi State-Alabama football game first. Look, I hear sports radio outside of Mississippi. You get some of those out-of-market stations. You hear a little bit on the SEC network. Nobody gives Mississippi State much of a chance in this game. I've seen Alabama live this season, of course. I don't give Mississippi State much of a chance in this game. But you go out and you play it on the field, you see what happens. So what do you think happens?
Yeah, I don't think any differently than anybody else. I don't give Mississippi State much of a chance in this one either. I mean, it's like you said. I watched that team go to Tuscaloosa last year, and I think the score was 51-3. State was awful. Alabama rolled up over 600 yards of offense, and I do think State will put up a better chance defensively than they did a year ago. Todd Grantham's got those guys playing very well on that side of the ball, but Jalen Hurts basically did whatever he wanted to last year, running and throwing the ball. He had 100 yards rushing and a touchdown, threw for 3 or 4 more touchdowns, through the air. So, it's a tough matchup for State, and mainly on, I guess, State's offense versus Alabama's defense. State really are kind of handcuffed right now. They've got the running game with Nick Fitzgerald and Aris Williams. Both those guys went over 100 yards again last week in the win over UMass. And, they've ran the ball so well this year. But you look back at last year's Alabama game, and, Aris Williams had some success late in that ball game, but Nick Fitzgerald, they bottled him up very well. He had 11 carries for 15 yards in that game. He just couldn't get anything going. And, I think that's going to be the case again this year. They know to key in on that. Mississippi State at receiver, they're depleted right now. Donald Gray is out. Gabe Miles is out. This past weekend, Keith Mixon was out. They're expected to get Keith Mixon back this weekend. He was available in an emergency situation last week. He was riding around on a scooter with his leg propped up in the air with a cast on, but he was dressed out, and he had his helmet hanging from the handlebars of the scooter. So they said they could cut the cast off if he was needed. And, that's kind of where their numbers are at receiver right now. Of course, Malik Deer is out for the season. So they're without their top 4 receivers last weekend. They're only probably going to get one of those guys back for the Alabama game. And in order for Mississippi State to pass the ball, they're going to have to rely on a lot of inexperienced wide receivers. The past 2 weekends, Jesse Jackson, who's a junior, has been the leading receiver, but Jesse Jackson came into this season with 1 career catch, so there's not a whole lot of experience from his part. And they've got some tight ends that are available, and the tight ends need to step up because those are the most experienced receivers that Mississippi State has, and they just kind of go missing from time to time during ball games. But this weekend against Alabama, I know Alabama has some injuries at linebacker themselves, but it's kind of like Dan Mullen put it. Even though they have injuries at linebacker, they've got a few more 4- and 5-star players on the sideline that were the top rated recruits in the country that they'll just kind of plug in place and kind of keep going. They may not have the experience of the guys that were above them, but there's still some talented players that are getting into that ball game. And I think Alabama will load the box up, try to stop Aris Williams and Nick Fitzgerald, and make Mississippi State throw the ball to those young and inexperienced receivers that I talked about.
There's just so much speed on defense for Alabama, Logan. And you look, Kirby Smart, longtime defensive coordinator there with Nick Saban. He's gone on, is having a lot of success with Georgia, obviously, right now. It looks like those 2 teams just headed nonstop to the SEC championship game, and they'll settle that on the field there. But even without Kirby Smart, Alabama just has answers defensively. So much speed, and I look at that Ole Miss game earlier this season. Ole Miss could not stop the run. Jalen Hurts hurt the Rebels. All those things that helps Alabama get to 66 points. All right, but it was the way Alabama took A.J. Brown out of the game that I thought was, again, representative of just a very good defensive plan by the Crimson Tide. Of course, Brown had 2 huge games, was coming, was a little bit injured in that game as well, but Alabama just shadowed him. They made sure that there were 2 people nearby at all times, and they just did not let A.J. Brown get free and go off the way he had done in some earlier games for Ole Miss. So they took away the Rebels' best receiver. They harassed Shea Patterson, and offensively the Rebels, who had been pretty good, had just could not get on track against Alabama. So that's what stands out to me, Logan, is Alabama's speed on defense. And if they are successful in taking away the Mississippi State run game, do you think Fitzgerald can respond? I mean, you've talked about, the issues there at receiver. I mean, what can State do if they can't run the ball?
I don't know. And that's kind of a mystery. I mean, they just haven't had even when they had healthy receivers, it's not like that those receivers were setting the woods on fire with the play. I mean, State's leading receiver has 200 yards receiving this year. And, they haven't had just one breakout type of guy. I mean, Donald Gray is their, quote unquote #1 receiver, but even he's been bottled up. He's kind of a guy that's playing on the outside that would probably be best suited to play in the slot. He's not that tall. He's only about 6 foot tall, if that. And they just don't have that one big tall receiver. I know Ole Miss is loaded with them. They got plenty of them, and State has several tall receivers, but they're all either true sophomore or redshirt freshmen, and just don't have a whole lot of playing time. They were kind of those raw kind of guys that they needed to develop within the program. Didn't play a whole lot of high school football, so those guys are still young and pretty raw and still learning how to play receiver and how to play the game of football. I know, like a Reggie Todd, take him for instance. He's 6'4" and looks like a prototypical wide receiver. Problem is Reggie Todd played high school basketball most of the time. Only played 1 year of high school football his senior year. He was actually committed to play college basketball in New Mexico State. So he, we're kind of a different type of guy. And you saw him. They tried to run a reverse pass with Reggie Todd in the UMass game this past weekend, and of course he just runs over there. And it's 2nd and 1. He could have just stepped across the line and picked up the first down, and instead he had the option to throw the ball, so he wanted to throw it and kind of just lofted it up there, and of course it was picked off. State threw 3 interceptions in that UMass game. One of them was a pick six. Nick Fitzgerald threw 2, and then of course Reggie Todd threw the other one. So it wasn't a clean game during the UMass game at all. I thought it would be a sloppy game for State in that one, and it really was. State had to come back in the second half. UMass went into halftime leading 20-13. State comes back and scores on their first couple of drives of the second half, takes the lead, and really didn't take the lead for good until Dedrick Thomas returned a punt, 83 yards for a touchdown with 5 minutes remaining. So, it's just one of those days where State played sloppy, kind of played down to their opponent. But I think UMass is a little better than their record indicates. But still, State should have won that game more handily than they did.
You were talking about those Ole Miss receivers, and they are playing well right now. We're really seeing the depth of that group as teams do focus to limit A.J. Brown. Brown had a couple of nice catches at Kentucky, one of them for a touchdown, but it was DK Metcalf who had 2 big touchdowns. Of course, the game winner from 7 yards out with 5 seconds left. When in doubt, just throw it up there to Metcalf, throw that fade and let that 6'4" guy just leap and really extend his arms and become a matchup problem that way. That's something that the Rebels like to do in the red zone, and it won them the game at Kentucky as Jordan Ta'amu, now the quarterback, completed that 71-yard drive. Logan, Ole Miss players and coaches just reacted like they'd won a championship. And, people will poke fun at that, but look, this team has been through a lot with the NCAA stuff, obviously, the coaching change, injuries. It's not easy to win a game on the road, and the Rebels were able to pull that off against Kentucky, and really at a gut check moment after Kentucky had scored with 2 minutes and 14 seconds left, after Kentucky had driven 95 yards for the go-ahead points. You got them backed up at the 5-yard line. You think maybe that's going to work out. Now, I'll say this about the Ole Miss defense. The best 4 possessions in a row that I've seen from this group this year came in the second half after Kentucky had gone up by 10 points. Probably not an Ole Miss fan there in Lexington, and there were quite a few, or those watching on TV or listening on the radio, what have you. Probably not too many of them thought the Rebels were going to win when they were down 10 points in the second half, and Kentucky has the 4th leading rusher in the SEC in Benny Snell. That defense came together, Logan, 4 straight 3-and-outs. They changed some things on the front. They gave Kentucky some different looks there, and the Rebels limit the Wildcats to like 14 yards on 12 plays over the next 4 possessions, and gave their offense a chance to get back in the game and take the lead. So Ole Miss actually goes ahead 30-27 on the 49-yard field goal by Gary Wunderlich there. So the Rebels had the late lead before they had to win it there at the end. So we'll see if Ole Miss can take those 4 defensive possessions and build going forward this week against Louisiana Lafayette. Now, Kentucky came back with a 95-yard drive and took the lead. I do think there was some fatigue involved at that point for Ole Miss, in addition to the fact that the defense just isn't very good. But I'm really interested to see if they can build on those 4 possessions prior to Kentucky's 95-yard drive. We'll see. Jordan Ta'amu really is the story for Ole Miss right now, Logan, stepping in after the injury to Shea Patterson. This is a quarterback that really nobody knew anything about. We just don't follow Hawaii high school football that much. And that's where he played and had a successful high school career. Then he goes off to community college in New Mexico. He's a 3-star recruit coming out of there. Didn't have just a ton of offers. There was interest in Jordan Ta'amu from others, but I think that lack of a high-profile recruiting battle, kind of kept him a little bit of an unknown. Now, Hugh Freeze and his staff evaluated him and brought him in, signed him. Thought he could provide some good depth behind Shea Patterson. But again, you're dealing with a little bit of an unknown as late as November. He had not been in early games for Ole Miss very much at all. I mean, and I thought that was odd. He didn't get in the game against South Alabama. He got in the game against Tennessee Martin for one play, and it was a handoff there at the end of the game. Jordan Ta'amu did not play snaps in a game that was not already decided until the LSU game a few weeks ago, when he led the Rebels on a scoring drive for a field goal at the end of the first half. So after the LSU game, he ends up starting the next week against Arkansas after the Shea Patterson injury. Plays extremely well, has 444 yards of offense. Of course, it was his late fumble that helped fuel the Arkansas comeback, but he was even better against Kentucky. Still the same poise and confidence, but fewer mistakes. Didn't make that many against Arkansas, but made a few. Played a really nice, clean game against Kentucky. No turnovers for Jordan Ta'amu. Led the Rebels on the touchdown drive there at the end. So anyway, this guy has been the feel-good story that the Ole Miss needs right now. And frankly, he's given them a lot of confidence. The offense really, it looks different with Ta'amu because he's a little more, he's quicker when he decides to run. And he'll take that running option, I think, earlier than Patterson had been taking it, who, I thought it was a sign of maturity on Patterson's part to keep his eyes downfield and look for plays like that. And lots of times that paid off for Ole Miss. But a couple of different styles here now. We're also seeing the tight end more involved in this Ole Miss offense. And frankly, it's taken this long, but all of a sudden we're seeing what the fuss was about around Dawson Knox, the walk-on tight end. So he's been a very sure-handed option as well. And when the Rebels got down there to the Kentucky 7-yard line with just a few seconds left, about 18 seconds on the clock, there were 3 guys that Phil Longo wanted to target. One of them was A.J. Brown. They tried that on second down after spiking the ball on first down to stop the clock. And that pass was incomplete, and then they scored on third down with the pass to Metcalf, but Dawson Knox was also an option there. That's another guy that Ta'amu was looking for. So we will see what this offense can do against Louisiana Lafayette. What the Kentucky game means now is that you figure the Rebels have a good chance to win against Louisiana Lafayette. Now, nothing is easy for this team. It's not going to be easy. Lafayette will have a pretty good offense. They'll have a good running game, and that's been Ole Miss's weakness. Now, what they will have will be a true freshman making his second start at quarterback, but his first start was a win. Levi Lewis, a 3-star recruit out of Baton Rouge, taking a red shirt off. They wanted to red shirt this guy, but he comes in, gets the start at South Alabama. The Cajuns win 19-14 on the road. So here comes a guy right now that you haven't been able to scout much on video. He's very athletic. He's a dual threat quarterback. That's going to be problematic for a team that is susceptible to the run as Ole Miss is. So they need to build on those 4 possessions in the second half at Kentucky. And in addition to Lewis, the Cajuns have a nice running game with running back Trey Regis. So those are things to watch for Ole Miss on Saturday. But the Rebels have a chance here, Logan, to build a little bit of momentum. You get that 1 win against Kentucky. They're at 4 wins right now. You figure they're going to win against Lafayette. Again, we'll see, but that could be win number 5. Then all of a sudden, it's Texas A&M coming to Oxford, a team that I think is vulnerable right now, a team that is disappointed after a couple of big losses to Auburn and Mississippi State. There will be all the coaching talk around Kevin Sumlin and his job security. It would not be stunning to see Ole Miss get up and beat Texas A&M in Oxford. That could really happen. And if that happens, all of a sudden you see the Rebels going from 3 wins to 6 wins. But there's a lot to do between now and then. But that's a path that they're on right now. That's a destination they could reach because of the poise they showed late after that Kentucky score to take the lead. The poise of Jordan Ta'amu and the offense driving down the field and getting that go-ahead score with 5 seconds left.
Yeah, looking at what State's got left on its schedule, I mean, obviously, tall task this weekend with Alabama coming in, the top-ranked team in the country. I do, like I said earlier, I expect State to lose that game, but that gives State 3 losses on the season, 7-3 at that point. 3 losses to top 10 teams, all 3 losses. Georgia, Auburn, and Alabama. That's not too shabby. And then State wraps up, go to Arkansas, who's playing horrible right now. So I do think State has a chance against Arkansas, and then finish up with the Egg Bowl here. So obviously, I like State's chances in Starkville. I would have a bigger question mark if that game was at Vaught Hemingway this year, but it's in Starkville. State's got a chance to wrap up a 9-win season there. So, that would put State into a pretty good bowl, probably the Citrus or Outback type of bowl, either in Tampa or Tampa or Orlando. So State's got a chance to have a pretty good year this year. And, that's exceeded the expectations of where, many people had Mississippi State going into the season. I think State was picked to finish 6th in the SEC West this year. So State's going to exceed expectations. No matter how the rest of the season turns out, they're going to finish, ahead of where many people thought they would.
Logan, no matter what's going on in football season, there's always one eye on the Egg Bowl, and you see it. You watch what these teams are achieving and what they accomplished during the season. You always kind of weigh that against how you think the Egg Bowl is going to play out. And I just think State's run game is going to be a very, very difficult matchup for Ole Miss unless we see some remarkable sudden improvement with this Ole Miss team with gap control and run fits and tackling and things of that nature. Unless the Rebels take big steps forward fast, that's going to be a very difficult matchup, the MSU run game against the Ole Miss defense. So we'll see. But I like the Rebels' chances here against Louisiana Lafayette, and I do think that they have a chance to get up and beat Texas A&M at home. And then the Egg Bowl, who knows? The Rebels would have to somehow slow that run game, or maybe it becomes a shootout in the last team with the ball, and maybe that happens to be Ole Miss because they have played well offensively of late, especially under the poise that Jordan Ta'amu showed late against Kentucky. Really a feel-good story there, Logan, the way this kid has come on and played. One other thing to note for Ole Miss fans this week, remember, you're going to hear Louisiana a lot, and after all these years, you're going to think, where's the University of Louisiana? There is an official hyphen in there. It is Louisiana Lafayette. So I got skin in the game there, Logan. Being from Northeast Louisiana, which is now Louisiana Monroe. But it's always interesting to see the Cajuns come around.
Yeah, and one thing I did want to mention too, Andy Canizero with Mississippi State signed the #2 recruiting class in the country. So hadn't even, I think it's been a little over a year, maybe a year and 3 days since he took the job, and has already signed the #2 class in the country. According to Perfect Games. So Andy Canizero getting the job done on the recruiting trail in baseball.
Hey, what's the status of Dudy Noble Field now, and what do you hear on construction updates?
They're practicing there. I mean, obviously they're still undergoing construction as practice is going on, and the field is actually intact. They're able to practice on it, play on it, and all that stuff. The only thing is they can't have anybody in the stands because they're still doing construction in the stands, and they're playing their Maroon White World Series down at Smith Willis Park in Jackson. They've already played one weekend series down there. They've got another one coming up next weekend when Mississippi State football is away at Arkansas. So they're going to wrap up fall practice next week at Smith Wills down in Jackson. But the stadium, it's going to be somewhat playable. It's going to be functional for the season this spring. It's not going to be completed. They're going to get to a point where they can, there's going to be limited capacity there. They're going to be able to play on it this year. They're going to have to play a lot of road games, especially early on in the season. I think they're not going to play their first home game until nearly March. So they're going to be on the road for the most of the month of February, and have some gaps in between there. They're going to be on the road for a couple of weeks at a time, where they can get as much construction done, and then they'll take a break from construction while State plays some home games. They'll go back out on the road, and they'll try to get as much construction done while they're not there. So it's kind of a work in progress, but it actually, driving by the stadium, it actually looks sort of like a baseball stadium right now.
Well, there's construction ongoing at Swayze Field as well. The Rebels had to do a lot of their fall practice over at Oxford High School. They are adding a hitting facility, some new locker rooms and things like that. And one of the things I think is going to be interesting, Logan, that they will add will be like a third base patio there down on the third base line, up above those seats and those areas. And, you see these at, I guess I would see them more at some of the nicer high school stadiums, like on top of the press box, where the boosters will have put up a rail and a place that you can go and just stand and kind of mill around and watch the game there. But I think that'll be a really nice element for the stadium when that construction is finished. So construction at both of the baseball stadiums right now, it is around the corner. Folks, that's it for this edition of Double Coverage. We thank you for clicking in with us today. Be sure to check out the Memo, our news podcast, All Things Northeast Mississippi, with Chris Kiefer and Derek Russell. That comes to you every Wednesday and Friday. And be sure to check out Prep Rally for all your high school sports needs every Wednesday with Bradlock and Dalton Middleton. And Logan and I will be back with you next week for another round of Double Coverage.